The fluorescent lights had hummed over Roan Whitaker for 6,574 mornings. He counted them once in pencil in the back of a paperback he'd read so many times the spine had gone soft. The state of California had owned him since he was 3 years old. It had fed him, clothed him, and housed him in buildings that all smelled the same. Bleach and quiet desperation. Cheap floor wax and the breath of boys who slept too close together. On the morning of his 18th birthday, the state was showing him the door. He sat on the edge of his bunk and laced his boots slowly. The leather was cracked. The laces had been replaced twice. There was a boy across the room still sleeping, mouth open, one arm hanging off the mattress. Roan would never see him again. Roan would never see any of them again. He'd packed the night before 2 duffel bags. One held clothes that had been donated by people he would never meet, sized for a body that wasn't quite his. The other held a few worn paperbacks, a sketchbook, and a single photograph of a woman he barely remembered. His grandmother, Adelaide. The name had a weight to it that none of his caseworkers ever did. He'd kept the photograph in a sleeve of waxed paper for 15 years. The corners were soft as cloth. He stood up. He looked once around the room. He didn't say goodbye. The hallway outside smelled of the same floor wax, the same fluorescent buzz. He passed the kitchen where the night cook was scraping a griddle. He passed the rec room where the television was already on, talking to no one. He walked toward the office at the end of the hall, the way a man walks toward a dentist's chair. Knowing what was coming, wanting it done. Ms. Hollister was waiting for him. She was a woman somewhere past 50, pale and thin, her hair pulled back in a tight gray knot. Her office was beige. The walls were beige. The carpet was beige. There was a poster on the wall of a kitten dangling from a tree branch with the words "Hang in there" printed underneath. Roan had stared at that kitten through every meeting for 2 years. He felt more like the branch. "Sit down, Roan." He sat. He set the duffel bags by his feet. They made a soft, defeated sound on the carpet. "Happy birthday." It didn't sound like a birthday. It sounded like a sentence being read. She slid papers across the desk. ID card, Social Security card, a check from the Transitional Housing Fund that wouldn't pay 1 month's rent in any city he'd ever heard of. She ticked items off a list with a sharp ballpoint pen. She did not look at him. She had stopped looking at boys somewhere around her 30th one. He understood. He didn't take it personally. "You have the pamphlets." "I have them." "Shelters, job placement, food assistance." "Yes, ma'am." "All right." She set the pen down. For the first time, she looked at him directly. Her eyes were tired. They held something he couldn't quite name. It was either pity or the leftover weight of a life spent watching children walk out of doors. "There's one other thing, Roan." He waited. He had learned not to ask questions. Questions never made anything come faster. They only made it come heavier. "It's unusual," she said. "We were contacted last month by a law firm in Sacramento. It concerns your grandmother, Adelaide Whitaker." His breath caught somewhere behind his ribs and stayed there. Adelaide. The woman in the photograph. The woman whose face he could only summon in pieces. A laugh line at the corner of an eye. A hand on the back of his small head. The smell of bread and wood smoke from somewhere so deep in his memory it might have been a dream he had as a child and mistaken for real life. She had been his guardian for the first 3 years of his life. Then she was gone. Sudden illness, they had told him. After that, the system. After that, the bunk. After that, the kitten on the branch. He had not heard her name spoken by an official voice in 15 years. Miss Hollister slid a manila envelope across the desk. It was old. The paper was soft and yellow at the edges, the way paper goes when it has lived inside a drawer for a long time. His own name was written on the front in a long, looping script. He recognized the handwriting from the back of the photograph. The same hand, the same patient slant. He picked it up. It was heavier than it should have been. "Your grandmother left a will," Ms. Hollister said. "It was held in trust until you turned 18. It seems she left you something." He could feel his pulse in his thumbs. "What is it?" "It's a deed to a parcel of land in Northern California, near a town called Hollow Creek. 70 acres. The number landed and didn't land. 70 acres. He had spent his whole life measured in square feet, the length of a hallway, the perimeter of a fenced yard. He could not picture 70 acres any more than he could picture 70 years. She slid a second envelope across the desk. Smaller. Inside it, a few $100s in worn bills soft as fabric. And a single brass key. Heavy. Old-fashioned. The kind of key you saw in old movies and assumed had been invented for the movies. He turned it over in his hand. There were faint scratches near the bow. Someone had carried this key in a pocket for a long time. "The law firm said the cash was for travel," Ms. Hollister said. "The key they don't know, presumably for a lock on the property." He stared at it. It was so much heavier than its size. "Now, Roan." She folded her hands. The pen was set aside. This was the part she had been bracing herself for, and he understood immediately that whatever came next would be the part where the door closed. "I need to be realistic with you. I looked into the property myself. It's remote. Very remote. The county assessor has it valued at almost nothing. It's undeveloped. No utilities. No road access past a certain point. The trust paid the back taxes, but going forward, that's on you. Frankly, it sounds more like a liability than an asset." A liability? The word slid into him cleanly, the way bad words always do. It joined the other words he had been called or labeled with for 18 years. Ward. Subject. Minor. File. Now liability. He almost laughed. The boys at the home would have. Orphan Roan, they would have said, inherits a pile of rocks. There's an offer, she said. He looked up. A development corporation called Meridian Holdings has a standing offer to purchase the parcel. They've been trying to consolidate land in that valley for years. The offer is $15,000. $15,000. The number rang in him like a struck bell. To Roan, it might as well have been $1 million. It was a used car, a security deposit, and a year's rent in some quiet town. It was distance from this room. It was distance from this life. It was the smart move, and he knew it. Anyone with sense would say the same. Sell the worthless dirt. Take the money. Walk into a future you can build with your hands. He looked at the envelope, at his grandmother's handwriting. The signature at the bottom of the deed had the same long, careful slant as the front of the envelope. A woman who had taken her time. A woman who had meant every loop and line. He thought about a smell of bread he could not quite remember. You don't have to decide today, Ms. Hollister said. Her voice had softened just barely. The fluorescent light caught the gray at her temples. But it's an option, a good one, maybe your best one. He sat with the envelope in his lap. He could feel the brass key through the paper. He could feel the deed inside, dense with words written for men in suits. I want to see it. The words came out of his mouth before he had decided to say them. She blinked. Roan, it's a 3-day bus ride. Hollow Creek isn't a town. It's a wide spot in the road. What are you going to do up there? I want to see it. His voice was firmer the second time. He stood. He hoisted the duffel bags. The weight settled into his shoulders the way it always did, but it felt different now. It wasn't only the weight of his life until this morning. It was the weight of the first choice he had ever made for himself. She sighed, a long, weary sound. All right, Roan, it's your life now. She stood up and offered her hand. It was cool and dry, and the handshake was as brief as professional handshakes always are. He thanked her. He didn't know what for exactly. He walked out of the office. He passed the kitten on the branch. He passed the rec room where the television was still talking to itself. The automatic doors slid open and the smoggy California sun hit his face like a warm palm. For the first time in 18 years, no one was telling him where to go. He walked toward the bus station with the brass key warm in his pocket. It felt like a stone. It felt like an anchor. He didn't yet know which. The bus ride north was a slow, grinding migration from one country into another. The first day was concrete and freeway, the long sprawl of Los Angeles, bleeding into the flat farmland of the Central Valley. He sat by the window. He watched the world flatten and yellow under the sun. The bus smelled of stale air and warm vinyl and the small private anxieties of a dozen strangers headed nowhere in particular.
spent the hours looking at the photograph of his grandmother.
The picture was creased, but she was clear in it. A woman with dark hair, pulled back simply deep laugh lines around her eyes, a steady mouth. She stood on the porch of a small house he could not remember. On the back, in that same long handwriting, were 3 words. Always my Roan. That was all. That had always been all. He had asked a caseworker once when he was 12 what kind of woman she had been. The caseworker had looked through a file and said in the patient voice they reserved for hard questions that there wasn't much in the records. A single notation. Sudden illness. No surviving relatives. Roan had nodded and not asked again. Now he wondered. Now he held a key in his pocket that did not belong in any record he had ever read. By the second day, the land began to rise. The flat valley gave way to rolling hills, then to the steep, pine-dark shoulders of the Sierra Nevada. The air thinned. The sky sharpened. The bus climbed and climbed, groaning on the inclines, shedding passengers at every small town. Faces grew more weathered. Voices grew quieter. He was moving toward the edges of the country now, toward the parts of the map where the names get smaller and the print gets thinner. By the 3rd morning, he was the only passenger left. The driver was a heavy man with a gray beard and a tired, kind face. He looked at Roan in the wide rectangle of the rearview mirror. The bus shuddered around a long curve. Hollow Creek next, son. Last stop on this line. Yes, sir. You sure that's where you're going? Yes, sir. The driver studied him a moment longer. He had the look of a man who had loaded a lot of strangers onto buses and watched them get off in places he would not have chosen. He didn't push it. All right, then. The bus hissed to a stop in front of a single low building that served as the town's general store, post office, and bus station all at once. Across the road stood a gas station with pumps from another century. A few houses clung to the shoulders of the road further up the hill, washed pale by sun. That was Hollow Creek, the whole of it. Roan stepped off the bus. The first thing that hit him was the silence. It wasn't quiet. Quiet was something else. This was deeper. This was a silence so complete that the wind itself sounded like a sound threading through the pines high above the road. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried once. The bus pulled away with another hydraulic sigh, and a small cloud of diesel that vanished in seconds, swallowed by the cold mountain air. He stood alone in the road with 2 duffel bags and a brass key in his pocket. A bell chimed when he stepped inside the general store. The interior was dim and cool and packed to the rafters. Cans of beans, coils of rope, fishing lures hanging on a wire, flannel shirts folded on a high shelf. The place smelled of cedar and dust and time. A woman sat behind the counter reading a folded newspaper. She was somewhere in her 60s, lean with white hair in a long braid down her back. She had sharp, pale eyes that took him in all at once, the way a woman who had run a store in a small town for 40 years takes in a stranger. Help you. He set his bags down. He drew the deed from his jacket. He smoothed it on the counter. The crinkle of the paper was loud in the dim, woody quiet. I'm looking for a piece of land off Ridgeback Road. She glanced down. Her eyes moved across the page and stopped on the name. Whitaker Property, she said quietly. Yes, ma'am. Haven't heard that name in a long time. She looked up. Her face had not changed exactly, but something behind her eyes had shifted the way light changes when a cloud moves across the sun. She studied him longer than was polite, and he let her. He had learned over a lifetime that being studied was often the price of being seen. Your family. Adelaide Whitaker was my grandmother. My name's Edith Briggs, she said. My family's run this store for 50 years. I knew her. He went still. Something in his chest tightened around the words. You knew her. Not well. Nobody knew her well. She came down once a month or so for flour and coffee. Quiet woman, kept to herself. Strong, though. You could tell. Edith tilted her head. You've got her eyes. It was such a small thing. It should not have struck him the way it did. He had stood in front of mirrors his whole life. He had looked at the face there and not known where any of it came from. The shape of a chin, the line of a brow, the color behind a stranger's eyes. In 18 years, no one had ever told him he had someone else's anything. He had been a boy made of nothing. Now, a stranger in a small store on a mountain road told him he had his grandmother's eyes, and something in him cracked very faintly like ice on a pond. He looked down at the deed so she wouldn't see it. How do I get there? Edith folded her newspaper carefully and set it aside. Ridgeback's about 5 miles up that road there, she said, pointing through the front window. Pavement runs out after 2. After that, it's dirt and ruts and what your boots can do. The Whitaker parcel is at the end. There's an old line shack on it. Been empty 15, 20 years. He nodded. You planning to stay up there? I don't know yet. She watched him a moment. Her hand moved to a small jar of jerky on the counter, and she set a strip on top of his deed without asking. Buy some water, she said, and take a hat. The sun's bigger up there than it looks. He bought what he could afford. 2 bottles of water, a small bag of dried fruit, a folded paper map of the area. The cash from his grandmother's envelope thinned in his hand. At the door, Edith said without lifting her eyes from the register. There's a company been sniffing around the valley for years, Meridian. Buying up parcels, they send letters, they make calls. They've picked off a lot of folks who couldn't afford to say no. She paused. Just be careful, kid. That land's been sitting quiet for a reason. He stood in the doorway with the bell still ringing softly above his head. Thank you, ma'am. Edith. Edith. He stepped out into the sun. The road ran straight up the mountain like a line drawn by a careful hand. The pavement was sun-bleached and cracked. He walked. The duffel bags began to feel like punishment somewhere in the second mile. Sweat ran into his eyes. The air was thin enough that he had to stop twice and bend at the waist and breathe. He had grown up in a city that lived at sea level. His lungs were not ready for this. The pavement gave out exactly where Edith had said it would, and the road became dirt. 2 ruts worn deep enough to hide a man's hand. The pines closed in overhead. The sun fell into long shafts of green light through the branches. The silence got even deeper. The crunch of his boots in the gravel was the loudest sound for miles. After what felt like hours, he came to a faded wooden sign nailed to a tree. Ridgeback Road. Hand-painted. Old. He turned. The road climbed sharper still. The trees thickened. He almost missed the cabin. It was set back in a small clearing, half swallowed by manzanita and thorny brush. The roof sagged in the middle like an old man's spine. The porch steps had rotted clean through. The 2 front windows were boarded with planks that had gone gray and splintered with weather. The forest was reclaiming it slowly, the way the forest reclaims everything if you give it time. He stood at the edge of the clearing and looked at it. This was his inheritance. This. A leaning shack on a piece of land so steep and rocky that a man could not have run a goat on it. He felt the disappointment land in his chest in a long, slow wave. He set down his duffel bags. He sat on a fallen log and put his head in his hands. He should have taken the $15,000. He should have taken it and bought a bus ticket to anywhere and started a life like a normal person. He sat there until the wind stopped sounding lonely and started sounding like itself again. Then he stood up. He had come this far. He would at least open the door. He stepped carefully over the rotten porch steps. The boards groaned under his weight. The door was thick wood gray with age. The keyhole was crusted with dirt and spiderweb. He pulled the brass key from his pocket and scraped the keyhole clean with his thumbnail. He slid the key in. It resisted. He turned harder. Something inside the lock gave with a long, grating click that echoed in the stillness like a small gunshot. The door swung inward on hinges that had not moved in years and groaned the whole way. Stale air rushed past him. Dust, wood, old cloth. He stepped inside. It was a single room. Shafts of thin sunlight pierced the boarded windows and lit the dust in slow drifting columns. A bed frame against one wall, the mattress long collapsed into something that wasn't a mattress anymore. A small wooden table, 1 chair. A rusted wood stove in the corner. Empty shelves on the wall opposite the door. A coffee tin on the table lid sealed with a film of rust. It was the spare, lonely room of someone who had lived without expecting company. He set the duffel bags down. The disappointment came back larger this time. The trip was foolish. The decision was foolish. He sat on the edge of the bed frame. The springs creaked. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes until he saw colors. He sat like that for a long minute. When he opened his eyes, he was looking at the floor. He almost missed it. He almost stood up and walked out and started the long walk back down the mountain to find a place to sleep. But his eyes caught something he couldn't name at first, and his attention sharpened the way it does when a man hears a sound at night and isn't sure if it was inside the house. The dust on the floor was disturbed. Not by animals. Animal trails were random scattered prints, broken patterns. This was a clean, curved scuff, like something heavy had been dragged in a slow arc and then dragged back. Right under the table. He knelt. He swept his palm over the floorboards. Most were nailed down hard, the nail heads rust flat. But one directly under the table gave very slightly under his hand. Not loose enough to rattle, loose enough to feel different. His pulse climbed up into his throat. He felt along the edge of the board with his fingertips. There was a small notch near the wall, finger-sized, smoothed by use. He hooked his fingers into it and pulled. It came up easier than it had any right to. It wasn't a floorboard at all. It was a lid. Beneath it was a shallow rectangular compartment lined with old cloth. He stared into it without breathing. There was no money, no weapon. There was a leather-bound journal, its cover soft and dark with age, and under the journal, a roll of architectural drawings tied with a faded blue ribbon. His hands were shaking when he lifted them out. He laid the journal on the table and opened the cover. The first page was his grandmother's handwriting. Not a diary, not a letter, a logbook. Dates, measurements, notations in a hand that was patient and exact. Geological survey complete. Excavation, phase 1, cleared. Reinforced concrete pour began Monday. 2 trucks, cash. His breath came shorter. He set the journal down and untied the ribbon on the drawings. He spread them across the table. The first sheet was a top-down site map. The second was a cross-section. The third was a plan view of an interior space that was nothing like the cabin he was sitting in. Multiple levels, ventilation shafts, a water purification schematic, a power generator, a library, 2 sleeping rooms, an office. At the top of the first sheet, in heavy block letters, were 3 words. Project Sanctuary, the Archive. He stared at the drawings until the lines blurred. This was not a shack on a piece of worthless land. It was a gatehouse. He had been standing on top of his inheritance the whole time. His eye traveled to a small mark on the site map, 200 yards north of the cabin, a cluster of granite boulders, and it's drawn in pencil. Beneath the X, 2 words in his grandmother's careful hand. Pry open. He sat very still. He could feel his heart against the inside of his chest. He could feel the brass key in his pocket. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like someone breathing slowly in a quiet room. His grandmother had not left him a pile of rocks. She had left him a secret. He stood up. He folded the drawings as carefully as he could. He tucked the journal under his arm. He stepped back out onto the porch and into the late afternoon light. He looked north. The granite boulders were not hard to find once he knew to look. A great gray cluster of stones rose out of the mountainside like the bones of something ancient. They were covered in pale lichen and dark moss. They had been sitting there for 10,000 years, indifferent to whatever happened in the valley below. He pushed through the manzanita. The thorns caught on his jeans. He climbed the lower edge of the cluster. He moved around it slowly, scanning the ground, scanning the seams between the stones. He saw nothing, just rocks, just dirt. He almost gave up. Then he saw the line. It was nearly invisible. A thin, perfect arc in the dirt at the base of the largest boulder. The kind of line nature does not make. He knelt. He brushed the dirt away with his palm. His hand began to bleed somewhere on the rough granite, but he didn't stop. He brushed and dug and brushed. Slowly, an iron handle revealed itself, set flush into a heavy steel plate, both rusted to the same red-brown color as the soil, camouflaged so carefully that even at 3 feet, he had walked over it half a dozen times. The plate was circular, at least 4 feet across. A hatch. He wedged his fingers under the handle. He pulled. Nothing. He set his feet and pulled with his back and his legs. The handle did not move. He sat back, breathing hard, his palms throbbing, his arms shaking. The hatch had been sealed for a long time, and it did not want to open for a boy. He thought. He went back to the cabin. He took the iron pry bar from beside the wood stove. He came back. He worked the flat end under the lip of the hatch, set a small flat stone for leverage, and threw the whole of his weight onto the bar. For a long moment, nothing. Then a deep groaning screech of protesting metal, and a soft hiss as a seal that had not been broken in many years let go all at once. A small puff of dry, ancient air rose past his face. It smelled of dust and concrete and something else he could not name. The smell of a place that had been sealed up against time. He worked the bar again. The hatch lifted with surprising ease the second time, and he understood then that it was counterweighted somewhere below. He stood up and pulled the heavy steel plate the rest of the way open, and it rose smoothly on a hidden hinge until it stood vertical like a door cut into the ground. He stood at the edge. A circular concrete shaft fell away beneath him into perfect blackness. A steel ladder was bolted to the wall, descending into the dark. He could not see the bottom. He stood and looked down. His whole body was shaking, not from fear, from something larger than fear, from the slow, terrifying sense that a door he had not known existed had just opened in the floor of his life, and there was no version of the rest of it where he didn't go down. A boot scuffed on rock behind him. He spun. A man was standing at the edge of the clearing. Roan's heart kicked once hard. The man was old, broad through the shoulders, with a thick, weathered face and a short beard gone mostly white. He wore a heavy canvas jacket and worn jeans and boots that looked older than Roan was. He carried no rifle. His hands were empty and visible at his sides. He stood at a careful distance, the way men who have spent their lives reading other men know how to stand. "Easy, son." The voice was low, calm. It was a voice that had ended arguments without raising itself. Roan did not move. He did not speak. The pry bar was still in his hand. The man's eyes went to the open hatch. Something moved across his face. It was not surprise. It was something quieter than that. A kind of slow recognition, like a man who had been waiting for a long time and was now seeing a thing he had hoped to live to see. "My name's Cormac Sutton." Roan held the pry bar where it was. "I live 2 miles down the ridge. Have for 37 years. The old man's eyes came back from the hatch and rested on Rowan's face. "I knew your grandmother." The words hit Rowan in the same place Edith's had hit him. Lower, harder. "Adelaide and I were friends," Cormac said. "Last 15 years of her life. She told me one day a boy might come up that road on his own 2 feet. Tall, dark hair, looking like he'd never been at home anywhere in his life." A long pause. "She made me promise to keep an eye out." Roan's voice came out thinner than he meant it to. "She told you about me. She told me enough." The old man took one slow step forward and then stopped deliberately at the edge of the clearing. He didn't crowd. He didn't reach. "I've been carrying something for you, son, for 15 years. She left it with me the last time I saw her. Said only to give it to the boy who came up here looking for what was his. Said I'd know him when I saw him." He paused. "I'm looking at him." Roan's hand opened slowly. The pry bar slid down through his palm and rested on the dirt at his feet. He didn't remember letting it go. The afternoon light was beginning to slant through the pines. The hatch stood open behind him, a dark square cut into the earth. The wind moved softly through the trees. Somewhere very far off, the same hawk, that had cried over the bus stop that morning cried again. A boy who had been a file in a cabinet for 18 years stood on a mountain in the late light with a brass key in his pocket and a grandfather's age of a stranger watching him with eyes he could not yet read. And the second door of his life began slowly to open. Cormac Sutton did not move. He stood at the edge of the clearing, the way an old dog stands at the edge of a road, patient, unhurried, unwilling to spook the thing in front of him. His breath came out in a slow plume in the cold afternoon air. The pines rocked overhead. The hatch yawned open in the dirt between them. Roan found his voice. "What did she leave with you? An envelope." "That's all. That's all she said it had to be." Cormac slid one hand slowly into the inside pocket of his canvas jacket. He moved like a man who knew that a boy on a strange mountain in front of an open hole in the ground might startle. He drew out a flat envelope. It was the color of weak tea, soft at the corners, the way paper goes when it has lived in a drawer or a coat pocket for a long, long time. He held it up so Roan could see it. "I have not opened it. I have not steamed it. I have not held it up to a lamp." A pause. "I gave her my word." The old man set the envelope on a flat shelf of granite at the base of the boulder. Then he stepped back. 3 slow steps. He kept his hands visible. "Take it when you're ready, son." Roan looked at the envelope. He looked at Cormac. He looked at the dark shaft falling into the earth behind him. "You knew her. 15 years. How?" Cormac's jaw worked once. "I was the sheriff of this county. 30 years. I retired the year your parents died." He said it without heat, the way a man says a thing he has lived with for a long time. "Your grandmother came to my office about 4 months after the accident. She didn't want to talk in the building. She walked me out to the parking lot. She asked me one question." He paused. "What question?" "She asked me if I believed the report I had signed." A wind moved in the pines. The granite under Roan's hand was cold. "And did you?" "No, son, I did not." Roan took 2 steps and picked up the envelope. It was lighter than he expected. He turned it over in his hand. His name was on the front, written in the same long, careful slant he had been looking at for 18 years. He did not open it, not yet. He folded it once and slid it into the inside of his jacket against his chest. "I'm going down." Cormac nodded slowly. "I figured you might. You aren't going to tell me not to." "No, son, I am not." The old man looked once at the hatch, then back at Roan. "I'll be on the porch of the cabin. I'll wait. You take what time you need." A small, grim smile. "Door's locked. You've got the key. I won't go in." Roan looked at him a long moment. Then he turned. He swung one leg over the edge of the hatch. His boot found the first rung of the steel ladder. It was cold and solid. He took out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The battery was nearly full. The thin beam shook a little. He steadied his hand. He began to climb down. He counted the rungs as he descended. By 30, he had passed below the surface of the earth. By 40, the temperature had dropped a clean 10 degrees, and the air had gone still in a way air outside never goes still. By 50, his boot touched concrete. He stood at the bottom of the shaft and lifted the light. He was in a small round chamber. The walls were poured concrete. The floor was poured concrete. In front of him stood a single steel door, round-edged, with a heavy spoked wheel set into its center. It looked like the door to a bank vault, and like nothing he had ever seen in a house. The metal was matte, dust-pale, untouched. He set his hand on the wheel. It was cold enough to ache. He turned it. For a long second, nothing happened. Then, deep inside the door, bolts moved. He felt them retract one by one in heavy, satisfying thuds, the way a heart sounds in a stethoscope. The wheel spun freely the last inch. He pulled the door toward him. It swung open without a sound, perfectly balanced on a hinge that had been engineered by a person who had cared. A breath of clean, dry air came out and washed over his face. He stepped through. He had been ready, he thought, for a bunker, for damp concrete and bare bulbs, for a shelter. He was not ready for what he saw. He was standing in a home. A long room opened in front of him. The phone light traveled across it, slowly picking out shapes. A sofa under a white sheet. 2 armchairs under sheets. A long, low coffee table. A wall of bookshelves, floor to ceiling, packed tight, 1,000 spines waiting in the dark. A small kitchen at the far end, a square of stainless steel that caught his light and threw it back. A round wooden dining table, a reading lamp on a side table, its shade tilted as if someone had bumped it on the way out. Everything was covered in dust. The white sheets had gone gray. The wood smelled of long sleep. But the air was dry, and the order was perfect, and nothing had collapsed, and nothing had rotted, and nothing had been disturbed. It was a museum exhibit of a life that had stopped. He stood in the doorway and could not move. Then he stepped in. He walked the length of the room slowly. He laid his hand on the back of one of the sheeted armchairs. His fingers came away streaked clean of dust. He ran his fingertips down the spines of a row of books. History, philosophy, a Latin grammar, a field guide to North American trees, a volume of poetry. He pulled one out at random. The flyleaf had a name written in her hand. Adelaide Whitaker. Underneath it, in a different ink, one word. Always. He put the book back exactly where it had been. He found the doorway to her bedroom. It was a small room, a neatly made bed with a quilt folded at the foot. A simple desk under a small window that opened onto nothing because there was nothing above it but earth. A closet with a few neat clothes still on hangers. A pair of soft house shoes lined up under a chair. On the desk stood a framed photograph. He picked it up. It was the same picture he had carried for 18 years. The woman on the porch, the same dark hair, the same laugh lines, except this picture had not been cropped. The frame held the whole of it. She was not standing alone. A young man stood on her left, tall, dark-haired, lean, with a quiet, steady face. He had a small notebook tucked under one arm. There was a smile in his eyes that did not quite reach his mouth, the smile of a careful, serious man caught in a moment of plain happiness. A young woman stood on her right. Bright-eyed, sharp-jawed hair, the color of dark honey, a hand on the man's elbow. Her smile was wide and unafraid. Her free arm was wrapped around a baby in a blue sweater. The baby's small fist was curled in the collar of her shirt. The baby was looking with the focused seriousness of an infant directly at the camera. Roan looked at the woman's eyes. They were his eyes. He looked at the man's chin, at the line of his brow. He looked at his own reflection ghosted faintly in the glass of the picture frame. The same chin, the same brow. His parents, his mother, his father, holding him. He had never seen a picture of them, not once. There were no photographs in his file, no names on his social worker's lips. They had been a closed sentence in a paragraph that read both deceased prior to placement. He sat down on the edge of his grandmother's bed. The quilt smelled faintly of cedar. He held the photograph in both hands, and he looked at it. He looked at his father's face. He looked at his mother's hand on his father's elbow. He looked at his own infant face, looking back at him from his mother's arm. He had not cried in years. He cried then, not loud. The kind of crying that comes up from a deep locked place that a man has had to keep locked in order to live, and then a single key is turned and the whole locked place opens at once. He sat on his grandmother's bed in the dim light of his phone, and he wept for two people he could not remember, and a third he had been told only to forget. After a long time, he wiped his face with the back of his hand. He set the photograph down carefully on the desk. He kept his fingers on the edge of the frame for a moment. Then he stood. There were two more doors in this room. He opened the first. It was a child's bedroom. A small bed, a blue quilt small enough for a small body, a short bookshelf of children's books along one wall, a wooden chest of drawers, a reading lamp shaped like a fox. Above the bed, painted on the wall in a careful hand 3 words: "For our Roan." He stood in the doorway and his throat closed entirely. She had built a room for him. She had built a room for him here under the earth, while he had been sleeping in a bunk in a building that smelled of bleach. She had picked out the books on his shelf. She had painted his name on the wall. She had folded the quilt at the foot of his bed and laid it down and waited. He did not go inside. He could not. Not yet. Some rooms are too holy to walk into the first time you find them. He closed the door very gently. He went back into the main room and crossed it and tried the last door. It was heavier than the others. It had a keypad set into the wall beside it. The keypad was dark. The door was open by an inch. He pushed it. The room beyond it was the heart of the place. He understood that the moment he stepped inside. It was an office. Filing cabinets lined 3 walls. They were beige and old and meticulously labeled. A long central table dominated the room. On the table, neatly arranged, were stacks of folders, banker's boxes, and a small black cassette player. Beside the cassette player, set squarely in the middle of the table, was a thick envelope. His name was on it. For Roan. He stood over it with his light shaking very faintly. He sat down in the chair behind the desk. The chair gave under him with a small, soft sigh, the way old chairs do. He set the envelope in front of him. He took a breath. He broke the seal with his thumb. Inside were a dozen pages of handwritten letter and a single cassette tape. He picked up the tape. He turned it over. There was a single word on the label in her careful hand. Listen. He pushed the tape into the cassette player. He pressed the worn plastic of the play button. There was a click and a small mechanical whir, and then a voice came out of the speaker. It was her. Her voice was lower than he had imagined and warmer. There was the faintest accent in it, an East Coast roundness in some of the vowels. It was the voice of a woman who had read a great deal and who had thought about every sentence she said before she said it. My dearest Roan. He laid the letter flat on the desk and read the words as her voice spoke them, and the silent room read along with her in his head. If you are listening to this, then I am gone, and you have come home. I am sorry, my love. I am sorry for the life you have had to live. I am going to tell you the truth now. I have rehearsed this many times, and there is no easy way. A pause. The hiss of tape. Your mother was my daughter. Her name was Marlene. She was a journalist. She was a brilliant, unafraid woman, and the thing I was proudest of in my life was that I had been allowed to raise her. Your father's name was Theodore. He was a scientist, an environmental scientist. He was a kind man and a careful one, and he loved your mother in a quiet, durable way that I admired more than he ever knew. They married young. They had you. You were the light of their lives, Rowan. I have never seen two people love a child the way they loved you. He sat very still. They were working on a story together, not a small one. Your father had spent 2 years collecting evidence, soil samples, water samples, internal documents that were leaked to him by an engineer inside a company called Meridian Holdings. The company had been dumping industrial waste for years in poor mountain communities up and down this state. They had buried it in failing landfills near towns where no one in power was watching. Children had been getting sick. People had been dying. Your father had the science. Your mother was writing the article that would make it impossible to look away. A breath. They knew the danger. They were not naive. They had lawyers. They had copies. They told me everything in case. They made me promise that if anything happened to them, I would take you and the evidence and disappear. The tape hissed faintly. On a night in October 15 years ago, they were driving home from a meeting with their source. They were on a mountain road south of here. The police report says a logging truck lost its brakes coming down the grade and struck their car. The police report says it happened at 11 o'clock in the evening. The police report says it was an accident. Her voice did not shake. It was not an accident, Roan. They were murdered. I knew it the night I was told. I knew it in my bones. And I knew that the people who had killed them would come for the evidence, and that they would come for you, the son of the people they had silenced. They could not afford to have you grow up. She paused for a long moment, so I did the only thing I could think to do. I took the evidence, every page of it, every tape, every original. I hid it. Then I took you. I changed our names. I used the savings your parents had left for you, and I bought this land. On paper, it was worthless. No one would look for us in a place no one wanted. While we lived in that small cabin above us, I built this place beneath us. I hired contractors one at a time. I paid them in cash. I told each one a different story. None of them ever knew the whole shape of what they were building. It took 2 years. I called it the archive. It was meant to be 3 things, my love: a home, a school, a vault. He could not breathe. And then they began to find me, or they began to come close to finding me. I do not know how. I saw a strange truck on the road 3 times in 1 week. I received a polite letter offering to buy the land from a corporation I knew was a front for Meridian. It was a warning. They were getting near, and if they found you and me together, they would take you, and they would do to you what they had done to your mother and father. The tape hissed. I had a choice, Roan. The hardest choice a woman has ever made. I could keep you with me and risk losing you, or I could give you up to a system that would hide you better than I ever could. A boy with no family, no last name, anyone would recognize, no thread back to me. a boy who would disappear into a file cabinet and become invisible to the people who wanted him dead. Her voice broke for the first time. It tore the heart out of me, my love. Leaving you at that facility was the hardest thing I have ever done. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 2 hours afterward. I was not able to drive. A long pause. I let you go. I came back here. I lived in the cabin above us. I paid the taxes on this land for 15 years. I set up the trust so that when you turned 18, this land and what is beneath it would be yours. I prayed every single day that you were safe, that you were strong, and that one day you would come home. He realized he was holding the edge of the desk with both hands. This is my final act of love, Rowan. This place is yours. The archive is yours. In the cabinets along the walls of this room, you will find all of it. Your father's work, your mother's writing, the tapes of the witness who fed your father his evidence, a man named Harlan Doyle. He was a chemical engineer at Meridian. He came to your father at great personal risk. I do not know what became of him after he gave his testimony. He may be dead. He may be hiding. The tapes are here either way. A breath. You also have a choice, my love. In the bottom drawer of this desk is a small safe. The combination is your birthday. Inside is the rest of the money your parents left for you. It is enough. It is more than enough. You can take it and you can walk out of here and you can build a life for yourself somewhere quiet and you can let this place go back to sleep. No one would blame you, Roan. You owe them nothing. You have already paid more than most men pay in a lifetime. She stopped. That is one path. The other path is to stand, to use what your father gathered and what your mother wrote, to finish the story they started, to tell the truth, and to make Meridian answer for it. This second path is dangerous, Roan. They are bigger now than they were then. Richer, quieter, better lawyered. If you choose this path, they will come for you. They will come hard. But you will not be alone. You will have your father's work. You will have your mother's voice. And you will have this place, this fortress your grandmother built for you with her own 2 hands. The tape hissed for a long second. He thought it might be over. Whatever you choose, my love, know this. I never abandoned you. Every hour I was away from you, I was thinking of you. I gave you up because it was the only way I could keep you alive. This land, this archive, this is not all I leave you. I leave you my love. Every brick of it, a pause. Always my Roan. The tape clicked. The silence that came back into the room was enormous. He sat in the chair for a long time. He did not know how long. The light from his phone faded a little, and he reached out without looking and turned it the other way and laid it flat on the desk. He did not feel like anything could move him out of that chair. Then the phone on the desk rang. He had not noticed there was a phone on the desk. It was an old one, beige with a curled cord. It rang again. The sound was so loud in the buried room that it made him flinch like he had been struck. He stared at it. It rang a third time. He picked it up. "Hello?" A man's voice came through, smooth, polished, the kind of voice that worked in offices on high floors. Pleasant, warm, the kind of warmth a man learns from a coach. "Mr. Whitaker, may I have a moment of your time?" Roan's hand tightened on the receiver. "Who is this?" "My name is Bennett Crane. I am with the Legal Acquisitions Department at Meridian Holdings. I understand you have recently come into possession of a parcel of land near Hollow Creek. May I congratulate you on your inheritance." The cold that went down Roan's back had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. "How did you get this number?" "We have ways of being thorough, Mr. Whitaker. It is our work." A pause. The pleasantness in the voice did not flicker. "I will not waste your time. We have had a standing offer on that parcel for some years. $15,000. It is frankly generous. The land is undevelopable. The taxes are a burden. You are a young man starting his life. We would like to help you start it well. I am authorized to increase our offer today to $50,000, cash. We can have papers in front of you by the end of the week." $50,000. In the chair where his grandmother had sat. In the room where his mother's voice was still warm in his ears. Why? "I beg your pardon?" "Why do you want it?" A small pause, the first one. "We have long-term strategic interests in the valley, Mr. Whitaker. Consolidation. It is just business. It is not for sale." The pleasantness in Bennett Crane's voice cooled by a single degree. It was the difference between water from the tap and water from the well. "Mr. Whitaker, may I speak frankly?" "Yes. That is a lonely piece of land. A young man living alone on a mountain road in a cabin in poor repair with no near neighbors. Accidents happen on those roads. They have happened before. It would be a tragedy for one family to be visited twice." Roan could hear his own pulse in the receiver. "Take a day," Bennett Crane said. "Think about what you have to lose. We will be in touch." The line clicked. He sat with the dead receiver in his hand for a long minute. Then he set it back in the cradle very carefully, as if it might break something else if he did not. He took the envelope Cormac had given him from inside his jacket. He had forgotten about it for an hour. He laid it on the desk in front of him. He looked at his name in his grandmother's hand. He slid his thumb under the flap and broke the old glue. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a second smaller object wrapped in soft cloth. He unwrapped the cloth. It was a wristwatch, a man's watch. A simple steel case, the kind a careful man buys once and wears for 30 years. The leather strap was old and supple. The face was cracked. A single thin fracture ran across the crystal from the 4 to the 10. The hands had stopped at 347. He turned it over. On the back, engraved in tiny letters, worn almost smooth, were the words, "To Theodore, with all my love." His father's watch. His mother had given it to him. He held it a long time. Then he picked up the folded paper and opened it. It was a single page in his grandmother's writing. "Roan, my love. This watch was on your father's wrist the night they died. I took it from the wreckage before the police came. I told no one I had it." The crystal cracked at the moment of impact. The hands stopped at the time of his death. The hands stopped at 3:47 in the morning. He read it twice. Then he read the next sentence. "The police report says they died at 11 o'clock at night." He read that one 3 times. The last sentence was short. "Find Cormac. He knows." He set the page down on the desk and laid his hands flat on either side of it. He stared at the cracked face of his father's watch in the small pool of light from his phone. 11 at night, 3:47 in the morning, almost 5 hours apart. A man's watch does not get wrong about the moment a logging truck hits his car. A logging truck hits a car at 11, the watch stops at 11. A watch stops at 3:47, then something happened at 3:47. The accident did not happen when the report said it happened, which meant the accident did not happen at all, which meant his parents had been somewhere else with somebody else when the watch broke. And then they had been moved. The thought arrived in him fully formed and ice cold. His parents had not died on a mountain road at 11 at night. They had died at 3:47 in the morning, and the people who killed them had taken the time to make it look otherwise. He sat with his hand around the watch until the metal warmed under his palm. Then he stood up. He climbed the ladder slowly because his legs wanted to shake, and he would not let them. He came up out of the hatch into the long blue dusk that had fallen across the mountain while he had been below. The pines were dark against a violet sky. Cormac was on the porch of the cabin. He had built a small fire in a stone ring at the edge of the clearing. He had set out 2 mugs on a flat rock. He was not impatient. He had the patience of a man who had spent 30 years waiting for people to be ready to talk. Roan walked across the clearing with the watch in his fist. He stopped in front of the porch. He held the watch out face up in the firelight. Cormac looked at it. He did not need to ask whose it was. 3:47 in the morning. Cormac let out a long breath. Yes, son. You knew. I suspected. I never had the proof. Your grandmother never told me she had it. A pause. Now I know why. Roan sat down hard on the top step of the porch. The wood groaned under him. The fire snapped quietly in its ring. He stared at the cracked crystal. Tell me what you know. Cormac sat down on the step beside him. He set his hands on his knees. He had the hands of a man who had used them and used them carefully for a long time. He looked into the fire. The night your folks died, I had 3 deputies on shift. Around 3 in the morning, dispatch took a call from a rancher up on the North Grade. He was driving home late, and he saw 2 tractor trailers parked on a turnout where there had never been any business for trucks at that hour. Lights off, engines running. He thought it was strange enough to call it in. We logged it. I sent a deputy. He paused. By the time my deputy got up there, the trucks were gone. He didn't see anyone. He didn't see a car. He drove the road for an hour and came back. We logged that too. He turned the steel mug in his hand. At 7 in the morning, an out-of-town crew called in a wreck on a different road 20 miles south. Logging truck and a passenger car. The car was destroyed. 2 adults inside. Reported as your parents. The truck driver had walked away with a sprained wrist. He was not local. He was not employed by the lumber outfit he claimed to be employed by. We checked. They had never heard of him. That's in the report. No, that part isn't. Roan looked at him. That part got scrubbed. Cormac's mouth tightened. 2 days after the accident, my logbooks went missing from my office. I was the sheriff. They went missing from my locked office. The dispatch tape from that night was reused. The deputy I had sent up the North Grade was reassigned to a desk 100 miles away. 2 weeks later, I was visited by a man in a suit who told me very politely that the case was closed and that opening it again would be inadvisable for my career and for my family's safety. He looked into the fire. I closed the case. He said it flat. I have hated myself for it for 15 years. The fire crackled. A spark went up and up and up and disappeared in the dark above the pines. Cormac turned his head and looked at Rowan in the firelight. Your grandmother came to me 4 months later, in the parking lot, like I told you. She did not say one word to me about the watch. She did not say one word to me about evidence. She asked me a question, and I told her I did not believe what I had signed. And she nodded once, like a woman confirming something she had already decided, and she walked back to her truck, and she drove away. He paused. I never saw her again until 3 years before she passed. By then, she was sick. She came to my door one afternoon. She sat on my porch. She drank a cup of coffee. She told me she would be gone soon. She told me there would be a boy one day who would come up the road by himself. She made me promise. He laid the envelope's emptiness in his memory the way a man lays a body down. That's what I know, son. Roan looked down at the watch. The cracked crystal caught the firelight and threw a small fractured gleam across his palm. 347. He closed his hand around it. They killed them, he said quietly. Yes, son. And then they tried to make it look like a road. Yes. And someone in your office helped them. Someone above me, yes. And they're still there. Cormac was quiet for a long moment. The firelight moved on his face. Some of them are still there. Rowan looked up at the dark line of the pines against the violet sky. The first stars were beginning to come out small and hard and very far away. The mountain was completely silent, except for the small, intimate sound of the fire. He thought of his mother's hand on his father's elbow. He thought of the small blue quilt at the foot of the small bed in the room beneath the earth. He thought of $50,000 on the other end of a polished voice. He thought of a man named Bennett Crane saying accidents happen on those roads. He felt something old and quiet inside him sit up and open its eyes. He did not say anything for a long time. He did not need to. Cormac sat with him. Two men, one old and one barely a man, on the porch of a leaning cabin on a mountain in the dark. The fire crackled in its ring. The pines breathed. After a while, Rowan slid the watch carefully into the inside pocket of his jacket against his chest, where he had carried his grandmother's photograph for as long as he could remember. He looked at Cormac. I'm not selling, he said. The old sheriff nodded once slowly, the way a man nods when a debt he has been carrying for 15 years finally finds the hand it was meant for. No, son, he said. I didn't think you were. Above them, the stars came out one by one, indifferent to the small fire and the two men sitting beside it. The wind moved through the pines like a long, slow breath. The archive waited beneath them in the dark, full of its tapes and its files and its truth. And somewhere down in a city on a high floor, a man in a suit named Bennett Crane was setting down a phone and frowning and beginning to make calls. Rowan slept that night on the cabin floor. Cormac had offered him a bed at his place down the ridge. Rowan had said no quietly, and the old sheriff had not pressed. He had simply nodded once and walked back into the dark with the flashlight bobbing in his hand. And Rowan had watched the small yellow circle disappear between the pines. He had unrolled a wool blanket from one of his duffel bags. He had laid it across the bare boards in front of the cold wood stove. He had set his father's watch on the table beside the cracked window where the moonlight could find it. He had put his head down on a folded jacket. He had not slept for a long time. He had thought about a quilt at the foot of a small bed. He had thought about 347. He had thought about a polished voice on a phone saying accidents happen on those roads. Sometime before dawn, his eyes had finally closed. He came awake with the gray light just beginning to push through the boarded windows. His back ached. His mouth was dry. He sat up slowly. The cabin was cold enough that his breath came out in a thin plume. He looked at the watch on the table, and the cracked crystal caught the morning light and held it. He stood up. He drank water from one of his bottles. He put on his boots. He had work to do. The archive was waiting. He climbed back down the ladder a second time, and the descent was different than it had been the day before. The first time, he had not known what he would find. The second time, he was going home. He spent the morning down there. He did not yet open the safe. The safe could wait. The safe was a door that he was not ready to open until he understood the rooms around it. He moved through the office instead. He pulled the white sheets off the chair and the desk and the small couch in the corner. He found a broom in a closet, and he swept the dust into careful piles and carried them out in a paper bag. He filled a bucket from the small kitchen sink. He was startled when the tap ran clean and cold. There was a cistern somewhere. There was a pump somewhere. There were systems his grandmother had built into this place that would keep working after he was dead if he let them. He cleaned slowly. He cleaned the way a man cleans a chapel. When the surfaces were ready, he sat down at the desk and he began to read. He started with the cabinets along the east wall. They were marked in his grandmother's hand. Whittaker T. Research. Whittaker M. Notes. Meridian Internal. Meridian Field. Witnesses. Correspondence. He pulled a folder from the first cabinet and set it on the desk. The folder was his father's. The handwriting inside was small, careful, and steady. The handwriting of a man who knew that one day someone else might have to read what he had written and find it usable. The first pages were soil sample logs, coordinates, depths, concentrations, the names of 3 small towns Roan had never heard of. He read through page after page, and the names of compounds began to repeat themselves. Trichloroethylene, benzene, cadmium, arsenic. The numbers next to them were not the kind of numbers a man writes calmly unless he is forcing himself to. They were the numbers a careful, kind man writes when he has just understood that children have been drinking poison for a decade. Rowan set the folder down and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes for a long minute. Then he opened the next folder. His mother's notebooks were different. They were not careful. They were alive. Her handwriting moved fast across the page, a long, sloping shorthand of a woman who thought faster than she could write. There were transcripts of interviews. There were lists of names. There were small drawings in the margins, sketches of front porches, of a swing set, of a child's lunchbox. There were quotes circled in red ink. There were exclamation points. There were sentenences that had been crossed out and rewritten and crossed out again, the way a writer cuts when she knows the words will be on a front page. He read a page and a half of a transcript with a woman named only as J, the mother of a boy who had died at 7. He could not read more than that. He closed the notebook. He laid his palm flat on the cover the way a man lays a palm flat on the closed lid of a casket. By midday, he had filled half a yellow legal pad with names and dates. By mid-afternoon, he had begun to see the shape of what his parents had been killed for. It was bigger than he had thought. It was bigger than any one town. The dump sites his father had mapped formed a long, crooked line up the spine of the state, following the Sierra foothills, following the small, poor mountain towns, where the local papers were thin and the local sheriffs were tired and overworked. His mother's interviews were not 3 families. They were 19 families. He sat back in the old chair with his hand over his mouth. Then he heard a knock above him. It traveled down the shaft like a knock heard through a wall. He froze. He listened. He heard it again. 3 slow taps. A pause. Then a voice he knew. "Son, it's me, Cormac." Roan went up the ladder. He came up out of the hatch into late afternoon light. The old man was standing at the edge of the clearing with a small canvas grocery bag in one hand and a thermos in the other. There was a younger woman behind him in a denim jacket, the white braid he recognized down her back. Edith Briggs from the store. She was holding a covered dish. "Heard you were still up here," she said. "Figured you weren't eating." He did not know what to say. In all his life, no one had brought him a covered dish. He had eaten on trays and in cafeterias and out of paper. A covered dish was a thing other people had. He said, "Thank you, ma'am." "Edith. Edith." She walked up to the porch and set the dish on the rail. "It's a chicken pot pie. It travels. Reheat it on the stove if you can get the stove going. If you can't eat it cold, it's still good cold." Cormac set the canvas bag beside it. "Coffee," he said. "Milk, bread, eggs, couple of cans of soup, some matches, a small kerosene lamp, batteries for that flashlight you've been running on a phone that's not going to last forever up here." Roan looked at the small pile on the porch rail. He looked at the two of them. He could not have spoken without his voice breaking. He nodded. Edith looked past him at the open door of the cabin. Then, more slowly, she let her eyes go to the cluster of granite boulders past the clearing. She did not ask. She did not need to. Some women in some towns can read a man's day off his face the way a man reads a sky. She said Adelaide was a good woman. He nodded again. "You are her grandson." "Yes, ma'am." "Then you eat, and you sleep, and you remember that you have neighbors, 2 of them anyway." She turned to Cormac. 3 if you count him. I count, Cormac said. She squeezed Rowan's shoulder once with a hand that was thinner and stronger than it looked, and then she walked back to her truck. The engine started on the first turn. The sound of it faded down the ridge. Cormac stayed. They sat on the porch as the light began to go. Rowan ate the pot pie cold out of the dish with a fork from one of the kitchen drawers below. He had not realized how hungry he was. Cormac sipped coffee from the thermos and watched the sky. You found something today, the old man said. Yes, sir. You ready to tell me? Not yet. Cormac nodded. He did not push. After a while, Rowan said, there were 19 families. Cormac was very still. In your mother's notes? Yes. The old sheriff looked into his coffee. Then it is bigger than I knew. Yes. Then we will need more than us. Rowan looked at him. I don't know who to call. I don't know who they bought. You don't have to know. You only have to find the one person they could not buy. He thought about that. Ms. Hollister, he said. Cormac frowned not unkindly. Your caseworker. She was the only adult in 15 years who ever told me she didn't know something. She told me point blank the property might be a liability. She told me the offer was a good one. She told me she didn't know what the key was for. She did not lie to me. Other people lied to me. She did not. He paused. If she knows a lawyer, she'll know one who is not for sale. Cormac nodded slowly. All right, son. That night, Rowan made his first phone call. He did not make it from the cabin. He did not make it from the bottom of the shaft where Bennett Crane had reached him on a phone he had not asked to be connected to. He climbed up the ridge to a high outcropping of granite Cormac had pointed out, where his cell phone caught a thin signal off a tower 30 miles north. He sat with his back against the cold stone and watched the lights of 3 small towns burn faintly in the valley below. Miss Hollister picked up on the third ring. Hollister. Ma'am, it's Rowan Whitaker. She paused. Rowan, where are you? On the property. Are you safe? It was not a question he had expected. I think so. Mostly. I had a phone call yesterday from a man who said he was a lawyer for Meridian. He raised the offer to $50,000. Then he made a remark I did not like. What remark? He said accidents happen on mountain roads. He said it would be a tragedy for one family to be visited by one twice. There was a long silence on the other end. Rowan. Yes, ma'am. Take the money. I can't. Rowan. Ma'am, I can't. He heard her breathe out slowly. All right. I need a lawyer, not a state lawyer, not a public defender, a real one. The kind of lawyer who has been in a fight before
and is not afraid of being in another one. I do not know any. I do not know how to find one. I am calling you because in 2 years you never lied to me, and I cannot afford right now to be lied to.
She was quiet for a long beat. Then she said, I know one. Tell me. His name is Walter Pierce. He is 68 years old. He has been semi-retired for 4 years. Before that, for 30 years, he worked public interest environmental cases. He took a swing at Meridian 18 years ago on behalf of a family in a town called Bell Springs. He lost that case. He has not, to my knowledge, forgiven himself for it. He is the most stubborn, most incorruptible man I have ever met. He is also a difficult human being. He will not take you on out of sympathy. If your case is not solid, he will tell you so to your face and hang up the phone. If it is solid, he will not stop until it is finished. Will you call him? I will call him tonight. Ma'am. Yes. Thank you. Roan. Yes, ma'am. I am sorry. For what? For all of it. She hung up. He sat on the rock for a while longer, watching the small lights below. Walter Pierce drove up to the cabin 2 days later in a dust-colored sedan that had seen 40,000 more miles than it had been engineered for. He was a tall, narrow man in his late 60s with iron-gray hair cropped close to his skull and a long, weathered face that did not waste motion on expressions it didn't need. He wore a wool coat that had been good once and was honest now. He carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had been with him longer than his marriage. He shook Roan's hand once hard. Ms. Hollister speaks well of you, he said. She is not a woman who speaks well of people lightly. So I am here. That said, I am not in the business of taking on cases I cannot win, son. I am too old to lose anything else. Show me what you have. I will tell you what I think. Roan took him below. Walter Pierce walked the length of the main room slowly, and the only sign that the archive moved him at all was the way he set his briefcase down very carefully on the long dining table, as if he were setting down a thing that deserved respect. He took off his coat. He folded it across the back of a chair. He looked at the wall of bookshelves, and he looked at the closed door of the room with the small bed, and he did not ask. Then he looked at Rowan. All right, son, show me. They worked through the afternoon and into the night. Rowan brought folders out of the cabinets. Walter read them. He read them the way a doctor reads a chart, fast, focused, without comment. He took notes on a yellow pad with a fountain pen that he refilled from a small bottle in his briefcase. He read the soil logs. He read the interview transcripts. He listened to the first of the cassette tapes, the original interview Roan's father had recorded with a frightened engineer named Harlan Doyle. When the tape clicked off, Walter Pierce sat without moving for a full minute. Then he said very quietly, I tried this case 18 years ago. I know. I lost it. Do you know why I lost it? No, sir. Because I did not have a single document of what is on that desk in front of me. Because Meridian's lawyers stood up and said in open court that no such testimony existed, no such engineer existed, no such samples existed. And I could not produce any of it. Because your father had not yet finished collecting it. Because your mother had not yet finished writing it. Because the only witness who could have made my case had vanished off the face of the earth 1 week after I filed. He laid both hands on the table. They knew, son. They knew I was coming. They cleared the field before I got there. He looked up at Rowan, and here it is, 18 years late, in a buried room on a mountain, with a woman's handwriting on every folder, and a boy across the table from me who has his father's eyes and his mother's chin. He drew a long breath. I will take this case. He paused, on one condition. Sir, you do not lie to me, not once, not about a thing, not about a feeling, not about a fear. The minute you lie to me, I walk. Are we clear? Yes, sir. Then we are working. The next week was not a week. It was a long, single corridor of work, broken only by sleep that did not feel like sleep. Walter Pierce drove back down to his office and returned with 2 paralegals, a young woman named Halsey and a young man named Weeks, both of whom looked at the archive once and then went immediately to their boxes without speaking. They worked 12-hour days. They built timelines. They cross-referenced. They photocopied. They did not bring phones inside the lower rooms. Walter had been very clear about that. On the 4th day, Roan went up the ridge and called Wyoming. He had a number written down in his grandmother's hand. It was on a slip of paper inside the safe, which he had finally opened on the 2nd night. The safe had not held money the way she had said it would not, only money. It had held the original master tapes of Harlan Doyle's testimony. It had held a sealed envelope with a Wyoming address in a town called Sweetwater. It had also held a second envelope, smaller, tied with twine. Inside that second envelope was a single sheet of paper. It was a letter from his father to him, written when he was 2 years old. He had read it on the floor of the office alone with the door shut. He had folded it carefully and put it in his shirt pocket against his chest, where it had stayed since. Now, on the rock above the ridge, he punched in the Wyoming number. It rang 7 times. He almost hung up. Then a man's voice came on low and rough, the voice of a man who had been smoking longer than he should have been. Yes, Mr. Doyle. A pause that was longer than a pause. Wrong number. Mr. Doyle, my name is Rowan Whitaker. I am Theodore Whitaker's son. The breathing on the other end stopped. I am 18 years old. My grandmother left me everything. The samples, the notes, the tapes. Your tapes. A long silence. I am calling because I would like to come and see you. I am not asking you to do anything. I am not asking you to testify. I am asking you for a conversation. I will come alone. I will come with one other person, a man you do not know, but who is on my side. If you tell me no, I will not call you again. The breath on the other end was still uneven. Why? Harlan Doyle finally said. Why now? Because they killed my mother and father, Mr. Doyle, and I think you knew they were going to. There was a sound on the other end that was either a laugh or a sob. Roan could not tell. It cut off. You come alone with one man, Harlan Doyle said. You do not bring a phone that is on. You do not bring a recording device. You do not write down where I live afterward. You will sit in my kitchen for 1 hour. After that, I decide. Yes, sir. The line clicked. Roan and Cormac left 2 days later in Cormac's old pickup. They drove east through Nevada across long, flat country under a wide, pale sky. They drove with the radio off. Cormac told stories that he had not told anyone in 30 years. About the year he had made deputy. About a winter he had spent looking for a lost girl and found her. About his wife, whose name had been May, who had died of cancer 8 years ago, and whom he still spoke to, sometimes in the kitchen in the morning when he was making coffee. He did not say it like a man who had lost his mind. He said it like a man whose love had not stopped being love when it had stopped being able to answer. Roan listened. He had never sat in a truck cab beside a man for 9 hours. He had never been told stories. By the time they crossed into Wyoming, something inside his chest had unknotted by half a turn. He did not have words for it. He did not need them. He just sat with it. Sweetwater was a thin gray town on a thin gray road. Harlan Doyle lived in a single-story house behind a chain-link fence with a German shepherd that did not bark when they pulled up. The dog watched them from the porch. The man who opened the door was thinner than Roan had imagined. He had a long, careful face and tired blue eyes. He had once, Roan understood, been the kind of mid-level engineer who did not draw a second look from anyone. He let them in. The kitchen smelled of coffee and tobacco. Doyle did not offer them coffee. He sat across from them at a small wooden table. The dog lay down by the back door, watching. Talk. Roan reached into his shirt pocket. He took out his father's letter. He laid it on the table. He pushed it across to Doyle. My father wrote that to me when I was 2 years old. It was in a safe my grandmother built. I read it for the first time 5 days ago. Doyle stared at the folded paper. What does it say? It says that he is not asking me to fight. It says that he is asking me to live decently. It says that the choice is mine, and he will be proud of me either way. Doyle's mouth moved without sound. My father trusted you, Mr. Doyle. He put his life in your hands. So did my mother. They believed you. I believe you. I am not going to plead with you. The choice is yours. I just wanted you to see his handwriting. Harlan Doyle picked up the letter with hands that were shaking. He did not unfold it. He held it. He pressed it against the flat of the table gently, the way a man presses down a thing he is afraid will fly away. His face did something complicated. He sat for a long time. When he spoke, his voice came out from somewhere he had not let it come out from in a long time. Your father was the only honest man I ever met in that company. Yes, sir. He told me the last time I saw him that if anything happened to him, he had set it up so that someone someday would come and find me. A short, broken sound. I have been waiting for you for 18 years, son. Cormac did not move. Roan did not move. Doyle turned the folded letter over in his hands once, twice. There is something they did not catch, he said quietly. Something I never told your father. He died before I could tell him. The dumping was not random. Roan's chest tightened. Sir, they had a list. There was a department. I saw it. Internal 2 levels above me. A site selection committee. They did not pick the cheapest sites. They picked the quietest ones. They picked the towns where the local paper had folded. They picked the counties where the sheriff was understaffed and the school board was small and the median age of the residents was over 55. They picked places where if the children got sick, the rest of the country would not hear about it. They picked places where the people who would die were the people the country had already stopped listening to. He looked up. It was not pollution, son. It was a policy. The room was very quiet. Roan's hand was on his father's letter. Will you say that on a witness stand? Doyle closed his eyes. He opened them. Yes, he said. I will. They drove back west the next morning with Harlan Doyle in the back seat of Cormac's truck. He had brought one suitcase. He had left the dog with a neighbor. He had not looked back at the house when they pulled away. Halfway across Nevada, Cormac said quietly, without taking his eyes off the road, 22. Sir, 22 of those 19 families on your mother's list. I knew the towns. I patrolled 3 of those counties as a young deputy. There was a man in one of those towns, Wendell Breyer, salt of the earth. We bow hunted together when I was 30. He died of a cancer they could not name. So did his wife. So did their boy. He was quiet a long time. Your mother was right, son. Yes, sir. And your father was right. Yes, sir. And whoever sits in the boardroom of that company tonight has been sleeping in a bed those people paid for. Roan watched the long, dry country roll past. Not for much longer, he said. The morning before the federal hearing, Meridian's people came up the ridge. It happened just after 1 a.m. Roan and Cormac were in the cabin. They had been expecting it for days. Walter had warned them. Halsey had warned them. Edith had warned them. There were too many men in suits at the diner in Hollow Creek. There were trucks parked at the bottom of the ridge that did not belong to anyone local. Cormac had brought a shotgun up that afternoon. Not for show. He had laid it across his knees on the porch and cleaned it slowly while the sun went down. The first thing Roan heard was the low sound of an engine cut at the foot of the road. The second thing he heard was footsteps in the gravel. Cormac rose from the chair without a sound, the way a man who had spent 30 years moving in dark places rose. He stepped to the cabin window. He watched. He held up 2 fingers, then a third. 3 men, hooded, moving up the clearing. Roan's pulse was in his throat. His hands were shaking. He could not stop them shaking. He had never held a weapon in his life. He held the heavy iron pry bar from beside the wood stove. It felt like a stig. "Easy, son." Cormac stepped out onto the porch. He did not raise the shotgun. He simply stood with it cradled in one arm, broken open the way a hunter stands at the edge of a field. He let the moonlight do the work. The 3 figures in the clearing stopped. Cormac said in a voice that did not need to be loud. "Boys, you are about to make the worst decision of your week." A long pause. "This is private property. There is a federal hearing in 9 hours that you do not want to be tied to. I am a former sheriff of this county. I am known by the dispatcher of the only response unit that would get up this ridge before sunrise. The young man behind me has a phone in his hand pointed at you. He has been recording since you crossed the gate." Another pause. "You will turn around. You will walk back down to your trucks. You will drive off this mountain. If I see one of you again in any context in this county or any other, for any reason, that recording goes to 4 newspapers and the federal prosecutor in San Francisco. Do we understand each other?" The lead figure did not move. Cormac very calmly snapped the shotgun closed. The sound was small. It carried. The 3 figures turned. They walked back the way they had come. They did not run. They did not speak. The truck engine started at the bottom of the road. It pulled away. Roan stood on the porch with his pry bar in his hand and his pulse in his throat. Cormac did not look at him for a long minute. Then he did. "You all right, son?" "Yes, sir." Your hand stopped shaking. Roan looked down. They had. Cormac nodded. "That," he said quietly, "is the only kind of brave there is. The kind that comes out the other side of being scared." He sat back down in the chair. "Get a couple of hours of sleep. You have a long morning." The federal courtroom in San Francisco was full to the back wall. There were reporters in the first 3 rows. There were victim families in the next 10. There were 2 long tables, one for Walter Pierce and his small team, one for Meridian's defense, which was a small army of suited men and women with leather portfolios and faces that did not flicker. Roan sat at Walter's table in a borrowed jacket that Edith had pressed for him the day before. He felt the weight of his father's watch against the inside of his chest, where he had pinned it like a quiet second pulse. Walter rose for opening arguments. He spoke for 28 minutes. He spoke without raising his voice. He laid out in plain language what Theodore Whitaker had documented, what Marlene Whitaker had written, what Adelaide Whitaker had preserved, what Harlan Doyle had witnessed, and what Cormac Sutton had once been ordered by men he could not name in a courtroom to forget. He did not theatricalize. He did not condemn. He simply set the truth down in front of the jury like a man setting heavy stones in a wall. When it was Roan's turn to take the stand, he did not look at the lawyers. He did not look at the cameras. He looked at the jury. 12 faces. Some old, some young. He looked at them the way Cormac had taught him to look at men in the dark. He told them about a kitten on a poster. He told them about a manila envelope. He told them about a key. He told them about a boarded-up cabin and a hatch in the dirt. He told them about a small bed in a small room with 3 painted words above it. Then he reached into his jacket. He took out the watch. He held it up so the jury could see the cracked crystal. He told them what time the hands had stopped. He told them what time the police report had said his parents had died. He told them about a logbook that had gone missing from a sheriff's office 2 days after a wreck, and a deputy who had been reassigned to a desk 100 miles away. Then he took out his father's letter. He read it aloud. He did not get through it without his voice catching once. He did not stop. He read it through. He folded it. He looked at the jury. "My father did not ask me to do this," he said. "He did not ask me to fight. He asked me to live decently. I am here because I think living decently sometimes means standing up. That's all. Thank you." He stepped down. The jury was out for 14 hours. They came back at 4 in the afternoon on the second day. The verdict was guilty on every count Walter had filed, and on 3 additional counts the jury added by special finding. The criminal indictments against Bennett Crane and the chief operating officer of Meridian Holdings were filed with the United States Attorney's Office before the courthouse closed that night. The civil judgment against the company was $2 billion. The settlement structure, which Walter had fought for from the first day, was distributed across 19 towns with priority allocations for the families of the dead and the surviving children whose treatments would last the rest of their lives. It made the front page of 3 national newspapers the next morning. Roan did not see them. He was already on the road back up to Hollow Creek with Cormac in the passenger seat, for the first time his old eyes on the brown country sliding past the window, his big hands quiet in his lap. The first thing Roan did when he got back to the cabin was sit on the porch. He sat there a long time. The pines were turning gold at their highest tips with the late afternoon light. The wind moved through them in the slow way it did when it had nowhere it needed to be. Edith's truck was already in the clearing. She had brought coffee and bread and a pie. She and Cormac were inside the cabin talking quietly, and he could hear the soft clink of plates being set down on the table. He had wiped clean that morning before they'd left for court. He sat on the porch step. He took out the watch. He held it in his palm. He looked at the cracked face of it for a long minute. Then he pulled the small brass key out of his pocket. He put them side by side on the railing, the watch and the key. The thing his father had been wearing when he died, and the thing his grandmother had left him to find what was buried. He thought of a line on a wall in a small room. For our Roan. He understood finally what his inheritance had been. It had not been the 70 acres. It had not been the bunker beneath them. It had not been the safe and the money and the documents and the tapes. Those had been the tools. Those had been what she had built him in order that he could do the work. The inheritance had been the work. The inheritance had been the chance to be the man his father had hoped he might be. Cormac came out onto the porch behind him with 2 mugs of coffee. He set one down beside Rowan on the rail. The old sheriff sat down on the step beside him with a small grunt. They did not speak for a while. Then Cormac said, "Whitaker Foundation." "Sir." Walter mentioned it on the drive back. He has clients all over this country who got hurt the same way. They have nowhere to go. He said he could use a place, a center, a clearinghouse. A pause. He said maybe a buried room on a mountain in Hollow Creek wouldn't be the worst place to put one. Roan looked out at the pines. "It isn't a bunker anymore." "No, son, I don't think it is." The light moved on the ridge. Edith came out behind them with 3 plates. She set one down beside each of them and one for herself on the porch boards. They ate the pie out there as the sun went down. None of them said much. The wind moved. A hawk crossed the sky once very high, very small, going west. Roan looked at the 2 old people beside him on the porch. He thought of a hallway with a kitten on the wall. He thought of a bunk and a bag and a bus. He thought of a woman on a porch in a photograph and a man with a quiet smile and a baby in a blue sweater looking at a camera. He thought of his grandmother who had sat alone on this same porch for 15 years, paying the taxes waiting. He set his coffee down. He looked out at the 70 acres of land that was his. It was not a wasteland. It had never been a wasteland. It had been a promise kept by a woman who had loved him for a boy she had not been allowed to raise against a day she had not lived to see. He had come home to it. He was home,